In the wake of UFC 321, let's ask a very basic question, which is, does glove design matter in terms of reducing eye injuries in professional mixed martial arts bouts, right? Can you engineer some kind of design to not eliminate eye pokes? I don't think anyone really believes that. Again, to eliminate eye pokes, you'd probably have to have a boxing glove, and even then the thumb can sometimes get in the eye. But for MMA, if you design the right kind of glove such that one exists, can it reduce the amount of eye pokes, eye injuries? But let's, in this particular case, just focus on one kind of eye injury, which is eye pokes. The answer is we think so. We don't know totally, but there's at least some reason to believe that could be true. Let me say something just up front that we have to be honest about. There's going to be one case in all that I mentioned that has something of an evidentiary basis, and I think it's important to note. We should not dismiss it. But one thing that is just universally true is glove geometry, essentially, is not very well studied or widely studied. There's just not a lot of this that has been examined. So even if we come to some conclusion that some designs appear to be better than others, that doesn't mean that we have a super strong evidentiary basis by which to draw this conclusion. There's just not much of this to begin with. Now, you might have heard back in the day that the Pride gloves, and even Dream to an extent, maybe even Ryzen as well, certainly, that they have solved this problem, or at a bare minimum made significant headway by having, a kind of curved design. The reality is, in terms of any studies that back those claims, there's nothing, at least nothing publicly available. It is possible that Pride or Ryzen or Dream or whoever might have done some internal studies, and they've got some internal data to back that up. But when it comes to what the public knows, and at a bare minimum, what they've publicly presented, there really isn't anything to go on. More to the point, one championship recently introduced a new design, I think in 2024, to minimize the amount of eye pokes. But again, we don't have... There's no public data. Even if there was, it's not been corroborated by an independent third party. There's just nothing. They made a change, and that change was explicitly said to be done for reducing the amount of eye pokes, but we don't know what the results of the implementation of those gloves exactly are. UFC doesn't have a great design. Now, we know we went to another design in 2024 that they abandoned. There were some parts of that design in a few different marketing materials that claimed to reduce eye pokes, but that, again, we don't have... It doesn't really matter because they got rid of those gloves, but even if they hadn't, it wouldn't necessarily be clear what the evidentiary basis for those claims are. PFL, I think, is in a similar kind of thing with their own manufacturer. You might have also heard of the Trevor Wittman Onyx system that tries to reduce zombie hand by getting the fingers curled over. Again, I'm not saying that that doesn't solve the problem, but in terms of any kind of data or any kind of third-party support, we simply don't know exactly what impact it would have. The funny part about all of this is we actually do have some data in one particular case and third-party validation in one particular case, the same case, actually, which is Bellator. Bellator's 2014 Power Lock glove. This was manufactured by Everlast. Now, when it was introduced, and part of the way in which it was promoted, was designed to be around this question of reducing hand injuries. That's what they were looking to do, was reduce hand injuries. And of course, it created I think they redid the foam in it, but it also redid the striking surface to make it curved. It turns out that there is potentially some data to that effect. In fact, the Association of Ringside Physicians, which is generally speaking considered to be the gold standard in a sort of a medical advisory board involved in combat sports, they recommend a curved design and did some looking into which of those curved designs actually had a meaningful impact in reducing the amount of eye injuries and eye pokes in particular. And it was, of course, the Bellator's 2014, that's when it was introduced anyway, Everlast Power Lock glove. This is what they wrote, quote, Preliminary data presented at the Association of Ringside Physicians annual conference in 2022 looked at eye poke incidence rate between the three most common glove types, that being UFC, Bellator, and PFL, and found eye poke incidence with Bellator gloves was statistically significantly lower than both UFC and PFL gloves at the time, and they give the values there. It is safe to assume that eye pokes will continue to occur if fingers are exposed, and further research should be done on glove types that further reduce the risk of eye injury. They double down on this essentially in 2025. First of all, they put out basically a position paper in 2025, this year in September, where they lay out exactly the situation around eye injuries. It was about much more than glove curvature or glove geometry. It was about a wide variety of things related to eye injuries. But here's one thing they said. At UFC Vegas 21 MMA event, it ended in a no contest when one fighter sustained an eye poke injury that left him unable to continue fighting. Afterward, there was increased attention to the types of gloves used in MMA. Preliminary data presented at the ARP's annual conference in 2022, as aforementioned by us here, looked at eye poke incident rates between the three most common glove types and found eye poke incidence with Bellator gloves was statistically significantly lower than both UFC and PFL gloves at the time. It is safe to assume that eye pokes will continue to occur if fingers are exposed, and further research should be done on glove types that will further reduce the risk of injury, end quote. Folks, this is what the evidence looks like. To the best of my knowledge, there's really nothing else. Now, again, there might be internal data that the various promotions have that they've not released publicly. In terms of the data that the ARP has, my knowledge is also that itself has not been reviewed by the public, so it's still something of internal data, although they've doubled down on it a couple times now, so that gives you some reason to believe there might be something to it, as well as putting the weight and the imprimatur of the body of the Association of Ringside Physicians behind the curved glove design that Bellator implemented. But this is what the evidence looks like. One more time, I'm going to repeat what we said basically at the beginning of the video, which is it doesn't really matter what you believe, even if you want to look at the case of the Bellator Power Lock glove, which again does have some evidentiary basis. We still need to know more. It just seems like there's more that could be done. I said this on my breakdown on Saturday night, which is there are many ways to combat eye pokes in MMA, and probably the most important of them is making the people who do the poking suffer significant penalty for it. However, if there is a world where a change or an implementation in glove design can meaningfully reduce it, why would we not seek that out? And if the answer is, after truly looking into it, and there's a bunch of studies done, and they find that there's no meaningful difference, well then fine. Then it doesn't really matter at that point. But we already have some data to show that the Bellator Power Lock glove might be the way to go. More might be needed. What would be the UFC's incentive to not do anything about this? It's not a question of whether they have the money or the resources or the time or the ability to implement this. They have Contender Series, which they can implement on there. They have, obviously, Ultimate Fighter. They've got Fight Night shows, Road to Asia. There's a bunch of ways they could implement this in a slow, kind of staggered manner to get a better reading on the data before ever, putting it in UFC title fights, for example. This is all certainly available to them. Dana White at the post-fight press conference saying, it doesn't really matter what we do. Eye pokes are just going to happen. With all due respect, I can't say that that's necessarily wrong because, again, there does need to be more work done. But we at least have some reason to believe already, and maybe for the last 10 years, that isn't necessarily true. If the number one medical advisory board in the sport that focuses on combat sports is saying a curved design is the way to go, what would be the argument for not listening? I don't understand that. I guess the only answer is they did this glove design, which may or may not have anything to do with glove geometry in terms of reducing eye pokes, and they didn't like the results they got in terms of the lowered amount of knockouts, and now they got spooked on the whole thing, and they don't even want to try anymore. Short of that, I don't know what the answer could even be. Bellator was in on something 11, now going on 12 years ago. We have a basis by which to move forward. My recommendation is, let's listen to the Association of Ringside Physicians and see if we can't do something about this problem. More needs to be done, but we've got a place to start.